Blessings. I am Heaven Hope. Welcome to Conversations with Goddess. The Goddess asked me to create this show so that she could speak, breathe, move, and express through each and every one of us. The time is now to hear her story and give voice to the feminine experience and expression in a world out of balance. I believe the divine feminine energy is the key to planetary healing and transformation now. And with that in mind, my guest today is a blessing. Her name is Blessing TARIKA BRANDT, also known as Presence. That's how I knew her. She is a most unusual and very special woman. She is what one might call an angel of death, or a death midwife. She calls herself a sacred flight attendant. She is somebody who actually has taken the time to do the work of showing up at the bedside of those who are dying. And she assists them in this very sacred process. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heavenly Heaven. I'm honored to be here.
We have gone on quite a journey to get you here. I don't know if we'll spend too much time going through all of that because we want to really dive into this very challenging topic of being a death midwife and assisting people at the end of their lives. Last couple of weeks, we've been attempting to get you on the show, and you've been dealing with death yourself, right?
Well, yeah, I dealt with death, and then I was, I think the last Sunday we were supposed to connect, I was actually in the viewing of a documentary that I'm in that's about that.
Tell me about that documentary.
A filmmaker that originally actually wanted to focus on the singing I do at bedside and also come to bedside with me. She met me at a sacred singing. Someone had recommended me, and she wanted to do a documentary about how music impacts people, especially how it's used in certain cultures in relation to death and dying. So that's originally what she was going to do. And I had a bedside choir, but then COVID happened and she had to change her approach significantly.
Run with me to the sea.
Blessing is an angel. So when she sings, she brings forward that vibration. You let go of the form and you let the music carry it. And she does a beautiful job with that.
Thanks. Often I hear people say, I can't do this about dying. And I remind them, you don't have to do it. This is one thing you don't have to do. You actually get to just be. That's what this is. And that's, for some people, so far beyond something they can even imagine. I've been affectionately called the angel of death a couple times, but I would love to transform the way death is seen. It's the presence of something and it's the absence of everything. It's like kind of a combination of both. It's everything and nothing at the same time.
As they very well know, I'm not okay with death. Still to this day, I'm getting a little bit better, but I've always been afraid I would die before the next morning. So I just know that, and that gets me emotional, I just know that there's so much more that I could be living.
Most people have a fear of death, naturally, fear of even engaging in a conversation about it. This is an absolutely important thing for us to confront, especially at this time on the planet when it seems so many are confronted with their fear of death. Blessing has such an interesting job. I feel like it's something that's important for us to learn about.
She was already a pretty incredible being. But at the very end of her life, I don't even know if I can describe it, if I can give word to what it was, but her beingness was starting to separate a little bit from her body. And even though, there was a breathing mechanism, breathing her oxygen into her, she was still conscious. And I could see her like dance with oh, that. And then she'd come back into herself, and then she'd go back, that. And then let it live in her for a while, then she'd go back into herself. And like, it was fascinating to watch. And I was just trying to support her in opening to this. And that's where the grace happens, is I feel like life says, you have one more chance to wake up to what's true.
What have you learned about in your line of work about life and death?
With each death, I've learned something that every experience in life has taught me. There is what I call a good death and a bad death, in a way. A lot of it has to do with how we approach it or whether we address it at all. Usually when people are unwilling to address it, then my experience has been with many people, and I've been at the bedside of, gosh, by now, in total in my life, maybe over 100 people.
Wow.
There's been more deaths than that, but there's been, I've been at the bedside of a lot of people that have been dying.
This is a topic that scares the shit out of most people. I feel like it's imperative that we face our fear of death and actually engage in this conversation. Tell me, how in the world did you become a death midwife?
I was actually a Tibetan monk, and I had been asked to take over the lineage, which was a huge honor for a Westerner and a white woman. And I felt extremely called to learn how to work with veterans on hospice, because many veterans die alone, especially Vietnam veterans. It's really sad, but many of them do. So that's originally how I got into the work. And my Lama at the time, my Rinpoche, said, I don't think that you should be doing that. You're going to be a great and powerful Lama, and you're going to be able to change the weather and all these other things. And that's not necessary. And that didn't resonate with me as true. And that was also one of the ways that I saw how my path was different. It wasn't the right path for me to continue in that realm. And I guess in a way there was a transfer that happened of the spiritual approach that I had to my own growth and and the planetary healing. Like when you become a Lama, there's a bodhisattva vow that you take, which I believe I'd already taken anyway. But that same kind of dedication and commitment is then what I brought to the bedside. And the practices that I do, a lot of the work that I do, including the bedside singing, became a spiritual offering, as well as also receiving the grace that's available for people in that moment. Like, it's interesting, you have the Northern Lights in the background, which I associate with such extreme magic. If you've never seen them in person, I saw them in Iceland for the first time, and it's extraordinary. There's like this ethereal kind of sound to it. It's very, very light. And then these incredible moving lights, which we see behind you.
Technical difficulties in the universe are just
Yeah.
So back to the light.
When I came to bedside, originally I didn't realize all the things that I had been doing in my life, that I've been trained at, that I had experienced, would lead me into that work, or that was part of the reason why I was good at it. I didn't realize that. I never thought about my 3 near-death experiences. I had them, but they were not something I thought about. They were just like something that happened in my life. I really didn't talk about them. And when I came to bedside, there was a recognition in the people that I would come to very often as if they were already expecting me. And when I would show up, there was a recognition, a celebration, a relief. And I often had that experience. It was unusual. Sometimes there would even be, another hospice worker that was there when I started doing hospice volunteer work. Even when I worked as a thanatologist, sometimes there were other reverends or other people who did that work. But when I would come into the room, there was like, oh, there you are, friend, there you are. And I often showed up with that, because in the beginning, I was really wanting not to be in life. I thought, well, they're the lucky ones. They get to leave. They don't have to be here anymore. And so I showed up with that very often. I didn't say that, but it was in my field. I wasn't coming to the bedside going, oh, you poor thing, you're going to die, which many people come to bedside with. Their own rejection of death, their own misunderstanding of the dying process enters the space when they enter. Sometimes they even will deny it, saying, you're going to get through this, you're not going to die. And while that may be true some of the time, it's not helpful when it is what is happening. I learned to see the portal in people, what I call the portal, which is when I look in someone's eyes, when someone is about to transition or is close to their transition time, I look in their eyes and it's like I look in and through and up. Where when somebody isn't doing that, that doesn't happen. And that was even in the work when I used to work as a healer. People would come to me with terminal illness. When I would see that, I knew I couldn't help them. But when I didn't see that, even if they were told they were terminal, I knew I could help them, or the energy that came through me could help them.
Blessing, can you clarify what you saw when you looked into their eyes?
It's where the physical space and the luminal space become joined. Because truly, in essence, we're not separate from life. We're not separate from anything or each other. In my experience, when the dying process happens, that veil is lifted. That veil of, if we don't insist on it, like if we insist on, no, I'm going to see it this way, I'm not going to look, I don't want to see that doorway. It's literally like a door opens, the light comes in, and someone either turns towards it and welcomes it, or they go, If they go, they miss the grace that's possible, which is profound.
Elaborate on the grace.
Like I said, to me, the veil is lifted and people tend to see more clearly the truth. Just recently, a friend of mine gave an example of her stepmother who had been very vicious to her all of her life and told her own daughters, ignore this woman because she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's crazy. And don't listen to her. And so her own daughters were very uncomfortable whenever she would speak. Her stepmother would basically kind of ridicule her, especially if she spoke about anything like the etherealness of what we're addressing here, right? Or about alternative diet, because she was one of the pioneers in that field. And then later on, at the end of her life, she acknowledged to her daughters and said, she's a visionary. You should listen to her. She really has a lot of wisdom to offer. But she didn't get to that until towards the end of her life. And very often, I think there's an opportunity to let go of grievances. When you start to realize that how you look, what you own, your ambitions, your goals, whatever it is that you live your life for very often, when those start to melt away and don't matter anymore, or at least matter less, that's when grace comes in, because something way beyond those things that we think we take for granted, and also the things that we put value on that really don't nourish us, come to be present with us. The unconditional love, for example, is one example of it. It's palatable in the space with somebody who's willing to turn toward that light, to turn toward their dying, rather than run away from it.
Being a death midwife, you have shared with me about various miraculous things that have happened at bedside.
I wouldn't call it necessarily miraculous in every circumstance, but one of the ones I think you were referring to is my experience with Tony.
Mhm.
And I had my hands up in support of her. And I was just basically just, holding my hands like this. And I think I was just imagine bathing her in golden light and sending her support and strength for her transition. Because sometimes it also takes energy. There's a certain level of energy that is required. I know that somebody had been watching me with great fascination because my hands were up for a long, long time and I didn't seem to tire. And at some point when I was doing that, I really saw the golden light bathing over her. And then it seemed to be like she, not that she was generating it, but it was just coming and pouring forward, where I was more the witness, where before I was sending it and intending it, and then I was witnessing it coming in, and it was pouring from her and around her and everywhere, to the point where it was just a luminous space in the room. And I know everyone that was in the room felt it, because they were sort of in awe. Really, I could only see this bright light, and her shape and her face was there, but it was mostly just this golden light in the room that filled the space. And it was very warm and very loving, what I would call grace.
So that's also the name of your website, Portal of Grace.
Full of grace, yeah.
And that's probably inspired by experiences such as that.
I would say to a degree, but not necessarily around the death work, because we didn't even add that to the website at this point. We haven't put that out yet. I've been found mostly through word of mouth, and I've been busy doing work just from word of mouth and recommendations.
Even at this time with COVID and all that's going on?
People are still dying. And in fact, I think the work now has become more about counseling people, because at this time people have a tendency to be afraid of death. And I think a lot of what we're dealing with right now is that people are so afraid of their own demise, that they potentially could die, that they're reacting a lot of the time. They're in reaction rather than in response.
Hasn't it always been the case that people are afraid of dying?
Always has been the case. And right now, it's for many people that watch the news and see the media, it is amplified. Mm-hmm. Especially because there's people who make money from promoting fear. Mm-hmm. And the more people are afraid, the more that they are concerned that for their safety. You see in that their fear of death, their fear of the unknown, which are basically the same thing.
What is your definition of death?
I don't see it as an ending. I see it as a pause. Because it's like when someone's talking and then there's a pause and then they continue talking. We don't end our consciousness. My experience from my own near-death experiences is that there's a movement towards something. And then the personality to a degree leaves, although for a while many people carry it with them for a while afterwards, before they merge into the unity and oneness of everything. It's literally a pause. It's just the body stops, the heart stops, and then the consciousness continues. And very often the consciousness that continues is the consciousness that you leave this body with. You have an opportunity to bring that consciousness to its highest vibration, to its highest frequency. And if you do that, then there's potential for a huge transformation, not just for yourself, but for the people around you.
Remember you saying something about the way you die is the way you live.
There's one side of the coin and the other side of the coin, and it's life and death. They're brother and sister, mother and father, whatever, however you want to call it. Just as birth is the entrance into life from the womb, death is the entrance into that womb, back into the womb, into the light. One you're birthed into light, the other one you're birthed out into the light. One goes, this way, the other one goes that way. It's the in and out breath. They're connected. It's the yin and yang. And I think in the Western culture, especially, we have not been given positive images for death. We almost never look at a dead body. If we do, it's something grotesque, usually. If you look at Halloween, it's all grotesque. There's skeletons, there's ugly looking things. Movies usually show blood and guts. And it's often, if not, 90% of the time or 95% of the time, it's related to something negative and emotionally devastating. It's not presented as something that you can cherish. It's not presented as something that you want to embrace. So it makes perfect sense that we would not want to embrace it because we don't have any positive associations.
There's definitely a lot of fear and a lot of programming around it. So
Yes.
since this is your area of expertise, you've been willing to face your own death. You have been at bedside for many. How would you speak about death in such a way that it would not be such a terrifying experience for those who are confronted with it?
I wish I could say, I just have this magic words that I could say to everybody and you won't be afraid of death.
Uh-huh.
And I could say to a degree, there are things that I can say. There are things I say in conversation, but it's not the same with every person. Every person's different.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you not afraid of death is going to be different than what makes somebody else not afraid of death. I can talk about my own near-death experiences and someone might feel comforted by that. And someone else might be terrified by it. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of experience or conversation to be had because every person is different and every life experience is different and every death is different.
Give us an example of what you experienced in your near-death experience.
My own near-death experiences, not every one of them actually, because I've had 3. I had one when I had a suicide attempt when I was 12. I actually felt very confused initially. But even after that, the experience of my first near-death experience was the same. The only thing I can equate with being one with God, one with Goddess, the consciousness of unfathomable, unconditional love, profound peace, harmony, joy, an incredible bright light that is warm and inviting. And I call it going home.
We've seen in documentaries and movies that tunnel of light, and someone making their transition is being drawn and pulled through this tunnel of light. Is that something that you have actually experienced, and have you witnessed that?
Yeah, in my experience, it was more like a rainbow spiral. I know some people see it as a tunnel. For me, it was a rainbow. And it was different. Like I said, each time experience has been slightly different because I have had more than one. Essentially, it's similar with the tunnel of light and then merging into that light, merging into that God consciousness.
The luminosity of that journey. Could you elaborate on that?
It's emerging into the best aspect of ourselves as human beings. It's being one with divinity. And it's experiencing it rather than talking about it, rather than thinking about it, rather than having beliefs around it. It's actually being in it. And not everyone has the opportunity to go through a dying process. But if you've been given that gift, where you have that opportunity, you can make the most of it and start to experience that connection with the divinity right away, immediately. Start to build a relationship with it, so that when you cross over, it's like being carried into that to an even greater degree. But you start it here, and then you give the gift of that to whoever is surrounded by you. That's I said in the documentary, which was funny to hear because it was kind of said as an off comment, but I said, some people go to church, I go to bedside.
If I could do nothing else with my life and something else paid my bills and I didn't have to worry about that, I could easily do that only and spend my entire life just sitting at somebody's bedside. I can't think of more sacred space. Some people go to church, I go to bedside.
When someone is willing to move in that direction. And even when they're not, for me in general, there's a sacredness. There's a profound sacredness, and those who've experienced it understand what an honor it is to be there. And yes, it requires putting your ego aside. Yes, it requires being heart-centered. It requires patience. It might require being open to, smelly diapers and changing and things that people don't want to deal with, like a baby, But to me, that's not a sacrifice. It's just part of what is. And I feel honored to be invited into that tender and sacred space. And I feel honored to have someone trust me to support them in that journey. I happen to have some experience that translates without even speaking about it into the space. Near-death experiences, for one.
Mm-hmm.
I think my open-minded and open-heartedness, my willingness to be in the moment and be able to be present and presencing someone, presencing myself, being able to acknowledge if something is triggering, that I can own it as my own rather than project it into the space. Being able to set aside myself in my life and just be with somebody rather than, thinking about, what I have to do. And, there's many, or just making it about me. You do have to have a servant's heart. It doesn't really work for people, I find, to do the work when they're not in space or when they're deathly afraid of it. No pun intended, or pun intended, as it were.
That's what makes you such a unique person. I don't know too many humans who could really handle all of that. It sounds so beautiful and unconditional, but unfortunately, I don't encounter too many people who are in that state of being and that could really hold space like that. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of selflessness, which you are blessed with, Blessing.
We don't know what someone is going to speak to someone and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I say, like, your own personal experience may not be somebody else's. Your own reaction to it may not be someone else's. In general, it's not, because we each have our own relationship with it. And part of it is dancing in the discomfort with it and looking what that's about for each person. Like, if they're willing to do that. For some people, it's a bitter pill to swallow, no matter what, because they don't want to go there ever. But for those people, this is not the conversation that they want to tune into. Because if they don't ever want to deal with it, then this is not a conversation they're going to appreciate. Or maybe it'll open a tiny window, and towards the end of their life, they'll actually go, wow, I remember that interview. Maybe this is a moment where I might want to reconsider the way I reacted to it. Or someone who decided to listen despite their discomfort goes, wow, actually, I think maybe I do want to turn toward it.
How do you support them in turning towards it?
People can work with me as a coach and counselor prior to ever even knowing that they're going to transition. I mean, we will all transition, unless you're ascending into light, which could happen. You could transmute your body, I suppose, or they extend life to eternal life, or you become a vampire, or whatever it may be, where you have eternal life. Most of us, I would say, would agree that we all have a graduation date. We all have an expiration date. We get that the moment we are born. Each body, each vehicle we come into, each personality we come into is a vehicle towards learning those lessons and towards extending that consciousness and towards contributing whatever it is that our mission or our purpose is for this particular lifetime. The reasons I think we have multiple lifetimes is that we're not always here for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're learning, you get a PhD, there's the graduation of that school.
Do you feel those who die have learned their lesson and that's why they're graduating?
Sometimes, often not. You work with the energies appropriately, and the space and the portal of grace, as I say, that opens towards the end of your life, then it is likely that all that you've incorporated, all that you've learned throughout your life, all that you've taken in and may or may not have even integrated, at the end of your life, you have an opportunity to do that in the most profound, amazing ways. It's really, that's the miracle. That's the magic. I've seen it. I come to bedside and someone is in one state. And then after some time, all of a sudden, all of these connections get made. All of these ahas happen. And I can feel it in their field, and everything releases, the stress and the anxiety and all of that lets go. Very often when I come to bedside, that's what my role is, to help unwind the person's nervous system from all of those attachments or kinks or traumas.
I was at my mother's bedside when she died, and I was there to hold space for her and help make her transition. And after she did pass, I remember looking at her and thinking how incredibly beautiful and peaceful she looked. And you shared something very similarly about your own father.
Absolutely. And I saw him in the morgue. Yeah.
The way you described it was profound.
He often had a lot of tension in his face, and all the tension was gone from his face. He looked years younger because all the wrinkles and frown lines and stress that was in his face, and also the need to control everything. Like it just melted away. So he looked radiant and peaceful and beautiful.
It's amazing how much we humans hold in these bodies and how that is such a vice grip, you know, an emotional vice grip.
Our bodies are an expression of what we believe, what we live, and what we hold on to.
True. Very true. Yes. Is there anything as the angel of death that you could share that would be helpful at this time?
Whenever we share anything, it's not going to be for every single person, but as much as I can share for the collective of what's might be helpful to hear right now is that there is an essence and a quality that it's really going to be okay. And that where we're moving is a change. It's a transition. Like I hear a lot of people say, you know, let's just get back to normal. Well, normal was crazy. And there's an opportunity to not go back to normal. There's an opportunity to move forward in a very different way than we have before. Many people were living very unsustainable lives. People who are always busy, 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 which I was one of those people. I was always doing for other people. And the lockdowns, the going in, literally going in, was really healthy and really good for me. I enjoyed my own company. I always have. But I really got to presence myself. And this is also a time where people who like to control every little nuance in their life, things have changed. So they have to get used to and comfortable with that things change, which is the only permanent phenomenon in existence. Change is what happens. We can't stop it. We can only learn to walk with it in a graceful way. And I also know that from every situation, profound blessings are possible if we allow them, if we allow ourselves to put our attention there. Just like if we think about there are always at every moment beings that are praying, that are saying mantras, that are sending healing into the universal grid consciousness of the world and of the worlds. There are benevolent beings that are supporting us. We can align with those frequencies, or we can align with the frequencies that tell you you're less than, you're not enough, you have things missing. This is a horrible thing. Voices that don't empower us. I would just invite you and encourage every person listening to this to put your attention on what actually nourishes you, to put your attention on what makes you feel peaceful inside, what makes you feel loving or connects you to your own loving. no one can take our attention away from us. They can try to draw it towards something else, but they can't take it from us. We have to give it. And if we give our attention to the things that empower us, like conversations with goddesses do, then we have an opportunity to utilize even some of these experiences, which, referring to, many people call it unprecedented times. Well, this is an unprecedented time because what's possible in the universal field is an enormous amount of awakening, an enormous amount of awareness, a different in the way that we approach and work with nature. We've created havoc in the 100 years that humans have industrialized. We've created so many negative circumstances. One of the things that they noticed in the lockdowns is all of a sudden nature was kind of replenishing for a while.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice to know that our footprint is actually beneficial, that we can actually be a beneficial presence on Earth rather than a parasite, which we have been in many ways. This, as in any other time, is an opportunity to step into our greatness, to step into our potential, to step into what we're actually here to do. It's not to watch Netflix all day, running around like crazy chickens, being on the computer 24/7, really unsustainable life. There's an opportunity now to really listen. Stop trying to make it be the old and move towards the new, and be open to what that could be, what blessing and miracles are available when we are not fighting for the known, but we're willing to open to the unknown. That's this conversation. Death and the unknown are the same thing. It's opening to something more. Grace is grace because it happens in spite of us. When I used to do healing work with people, I would see very often people would come to me with terminal illnesses and they'd say, my doctor says I have this much time to live. I'd say, throw that out. If we're going to work together, throw that out. And then when miraculous healing happened, it was because they threw it out for a while. They weren't attached to the idea. And a lot of it is also, don't be attached to your idea about what you think death and dying is. And what you've seen about it, be open to the idea that maybe that's not accurate. If you have pain associated with it, utilize that pain. Utilize it so that it can bless you moving forward. You can't do that if you don't address it.
Once you confront that fear of death, you experience liberation.
That's when what we call, enlightenment is possible.
Right.
I believe that at the end of life, quote, which is not really the end because life continues, that termination, whatever you want to call it, at that moment and before, leading up to it, just like a birth that leads into the birth, you're pregnant for 9 months and then you get birth. It's very similar with death.
Thank you for bringing forth this very powerful, triggering, and ultimately healing information. Where can people find you, Blessing?
Well, I also want to thank you for being willing to, in spite of your own triggers around it, that you're willing to breach the subject. Hats off to you. Because not everyone would, especially if they do have emotional content around it. So I applaud you.
Fortunately, the way I'm designed is if I do, I will definitely take a look and explore it.
But it says a lot about you as a person. So I really admire that. As far as how people find me, portalofgrace.us. Eventually, I'm going to have sacredflightattendant.com, but we haven't put that up yet. I'm also reached by WhatsApp. 310 Peter Pan without the N for Neverland is still my number there. And I am actually going to be offering a course called Death and Divinity for people who want to, start to work with that process. People can work with me privately as well. And I work with people also who are, who've already had a death, completion circles, which I think are really important at the end of someone's life. those that are left behind. There's many different ways to dance with this.
Mhm.
And it is a dance, and it is a beautiful one. And at least it can be. The more we are willing to let go of our ideas and concepts and follow the spirit of love into the desert, the greater the possibility for enlightenment, illumination, and joy.
A very powerful quote about Steve Jobs, somebody who had witnessed him making his transition, dying, using the D word, dying. At that moment, when he died, right beforehand, he said 6 words: "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." May the goddess bless you, and may you truly know you are safe, always held in Divine Mother's loving embrace of grace.